Now come to possibly the most famous book in the New Testament, other than the Gospels. That is the Revelation of John. A lot has been written about it, a lot of speculation about its meaning, its purpose, and when it was written, as well as who wrote it. Now we know it was written by John the Beloved, the Apostle of Christ. But scholars don't like this. As we have found in many other books of the New Testament, scholars don't like the truth. See, John wrote 5 books that we have in the New Testament. He wrote the Gospel of John, the Revelation of John, and the 3 epistles of John. But partly due to their late writing, a lot of people don't want to think that John the Apostle wrote them because he's getting kind of old. They see them as reflecting the time period of Emperor Domitian, which his reign ended in 98, I believe. It is believed that Revelation was written shortly before that, probably in the year 95. And his epistles were written either shortly before or shortly after Revelation. I have found conflicting opinions on that. But being written in the 90s, well, John's a bit old at that point. So did John write them? Well, with the epistles and the gospel, we can talk about that later. Right now, let us talk about the book of Revelation. Now, in the Greek, it is called Apocalypse, the Apocalypse of John. But this just means to reveal or uncover. So it's the same word, it's just a Greek form of the word. And in Revelation, it is stated that it is being written by John while he is on the island of Patmos. But it doesn't say John the Beloved or John the Apostle or anything else. It just says John, which a number of people take to mean that it was not the Apostle of Christ, that it was a different John who was living on Patmos at the time. His other writings are also often said to be written by other people, or to be written even by a community of people who are just disciples of John and are therefore putting his name to them. Largely, the dating of these books is based on the internal text and the assumption that John is speaking about Rome. So there are many things that people tie to the Roman era of the late 1st, early 2nd century, the time of Domitian specifically, although some even try to claim that the beast and the number of the beast being 666 is a reference to Emperor Nero and is not a prophecy of what's coming, but is a reference back to the past. Now, all of these things are based in a rejection of prophecy, more or less, saying he can't have been writing about the last days. He has to have been writing about the period he's in. And so they find all these supposed allusions to Rome and try to date it based in that. This is also the reason why they deny that John the Apostle wrote it, because, as I said, he would have been too old. Even if we count him as the youngest of the apostles, he still would have been probably close to 30 at the time of Christ's crucifixion. And that would put him in his 90s, if not older. So I think that is at least partly why they reject his authorship and why they try to date it to this time. Now, I personally agree with this dating. I think it was at least sometime after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. But we know that John was translated. But that's another thing, is that there were a lot of people, even in the early days, that questioned the authenticity of the book of Revelation. Many early lists and canons did not include it. I believe there are still some Eastern Christian churches that do not include it in their Bible. When the canon that we have was finalized, this is like one of the last 2 or 3 books to be approved as to be included in the canon. And even when we get to the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther had his doubts and included it with books like James and a couple others that he doubted their authenticity. Now, he got a little smarter later on. He warmed up to them. But when he initially started translating the Bible into German, these books he put at the back because he doubted their authenticity. Revelation was one of them. Now, it is also true that there are less manuscripts in existence for Revelation than for any other book in the New Testament. Even the ones that are, one chapter, Philemon, Jude. There is more manuscript evidence for these books than there is for the book of Revelation. Now that's proportionate. A book that's 1 page long, if it has 5 copies of it in existence, That's better than Revelation having 20 partial copies in existence. So you understand that this is proportional, but Revelation has the least amount of manuscript evidence for it that we have been able to find. And a lot of the stuff, apparently, as I've been reading, a lot of the stuff that has been thought to have been part of Revelation has been shown to be other writings, maybe ones that were quoting Revelation. So actual evidence of it in the ancient record is relatively sparse, and we have many people from the 2nd century up to the modern day have questioned its authenticity and its authorship. So how do we know it was actually written by John? It is quite simple. Nephi tells us in the Book of Mormon that John was chosen by God to record this prophecy. In the book of 1 Nephi, Nephi, the son of Lehi, he has his great vision where he sees the history of his people all the way down to the last days. He sees the coming of the Gentiles, starting with Columbus, and he sees them driving his people out of the land and the establishment of the United States as a nation. And then God tells him, I'm going to show you the rest of the history of the world, but you're not going to write it because I'm going to have John write it. And John is mentioned by name specifically, and he stated he will write the prophecy of the end of the world. He wrote what Nephi saw. And then we have Joseph Smith, who is commanded by God to translate the Bible, restoring it to its original text. And in his translation, he affirms it was written by John, and he restores portions that had been lost. We also have Doctrine and Covenants section 77, which is a question and answers session with Joseph Smith asking questions, or others asking Joseph Smith questions about the book of Revelation and what the symbols in it mean, and Joseph Smith, through the inspiration of God, answering these questions. And in one of them, he specifically says it is a reference to John the Apostle and his commission in the last days. So this is how we know this book was written by John. Doesn't matter what all the scholars say. Nothing else. All the scholars are wrong because they are denying prophecy. They are denying the power and will of God in the writing of the scriptures. But we have the prophets telling us exactly what is. Now, on a brief historical note, I'm not going to get into the history of John himself. I will speak about John's history when I read his 3 epistles. But for this book itself, at the time of its writing, John was banished to the island of Patmos because the Romans had tried several times unsuccessfully to kill him because John was translated. They couldn't kill him. So they exiled him to the island of Patmos. And while here he has this vision, he writes the Revelation. Patmos is a small island off the west coast of Asia Minor. So it would be off the west coast of the province of Asia where the city of Ephesus is. And it is written to the 7 churches of Asia. Not to all of the what we call Asia Minor. Peter wrote to all the people there. Jude probably wrote to all the people there. John is writing specifically to these 7 churches in the western province of Asia as he is banished to the island of Patmos, probably around the year 95 AD. So now let us have our fun and read John's Revelation.